Again, welcome to all folks tuning in live or those who might be joining, watching this recording later. We have folks in the room from California, Pennsylvania, Grand Rapids, Michigan, welcome, Philly, Albany, New York. So many folks represented from many different walks of life. I think folks are excited to engage and learn. I can promise it will be a very dynamic evening together. So welcome. All right, we're close to 100 participants tuning in live, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Lisa Cataline. I serve as the Justice and Peace Coordinator at the U.S. Federation of the Sisters of St. Joseph. Tonight, I'm here in my capacity as a steering committee member of Nuns Against Gun Violence, which is something you may be familiar with and something you may not be. Tonight, you'll learn a little bit more about that work. Again, I encourage you to stay muted throughout our session here this evening unless you have a question at the end. We have substantial time set aside for that. I also just encourage you to take care of yourself in this session. We're dealing with heavy themes of violence and guns and mental health. And so just to note, just take breaks as you need to. Feel free to have your camera on or off. We know that we're talking about Catholic social teaching and we're talking about gun violence prevention. And so those can be very weighty things. So I want to formally welcome you to Firearms and Faith, Navigating Catholic Social Teaching in a World of Gun Violence. We are going to start, as we often do with many of these spaces, in prayer. And just to note before we do that this session is being recorded. It will be available to all registered participants and on our YouTube channel soon after we wrap up. So just to know that this is a resource for you going forward. So I welcome with that another member of the steering committee, Deb Rose, who's tuning in from Ohio to lead us in an opening prayer. So welcome, Deb.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. Oh, well, let's just take a moment. Dear friends, as we gather today to pray and learn together, we recognize that we do so in a world plagued by unbearable violence of every kind. As we reckon with the violence raging around us, and especially gun violence that day after day, night after night, claims lives, shatters families, and terrorizes communities, we pray that as people of faith, we may have the strength and courage to bear witness, to stand vigil, and to confront evil and violence in our midst. Let us become bearers of the good news, where light dispels darkness, truth exposes lies, love conquers hate, hope overcomes despair, and death gives way to new life. As we place ourselves before our God, we remember all the victims of gun violence so far this year and every year. We remember the children and the teenagers, especially those who have been killed in the past week, including Demarion Bailey, age 15, of Homestead, Florida; Isaac Rodriguez, age 15, of Milwaukee, Wisconsin; Diego Herrera, age 16, of Milwaukee, Wisconsin; Deshaun Brown, age 17, of Oakland, California; Alice N.O.X. Pettifor, age 16, of South Bend, Indiana; Issa Cece Stanley, age 17, of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania; Isaiah Neal, age 17, of Lawrence, Kansas; Justin Robinson, age 16, of Madison, Tennessee; Tyrese Stewart, age 17, of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Jonelle Zambrano, age 9, of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And Andre Lanz, III, an infant, of Deerfield Beach, Florida. Loving God, you who desire peace and flourishing for all people, look with compassion upon all involved in gun violence in our country and around the world. Bring those who have died into your everlasting love. Draw close to those who mourn. Comfort those who are traumatized. Strengthen, protect, and bless those who respond and treat the injured and the dying. Bring those who use violence and those in positions of power who condone or profit from the weapons industry into repentance. Hear our cries of lament and help us to rise up, work for change, and bring about your reign of justice, love, and peace in our broken world today. We make this prayer through Jesus Christ, victim of violence on a cross, our liberator. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for offering that litany of names of just children who were God's children, and who could be any of our children. We hold those names. So tonight we're going to dig a little bit more deeply into Catholic social teaching and how to navigate our faith and our convictions in a world really steeped in violence, particularly gun violence. And so today we have two folks who have been engaged in a variety of ways in gun violence prevention. I'm proud to call them colleagues across the digital space. And they're both founding members of Nuns Against Gun Violence Coalition, which started only a little over a year ago. So I'm happy to introduce both of them now. So first, let me introduce Angie Howard-McParland. Angie is based in Rhode Island and has served in her role as Justice Resource Manager for Sisters of Mercy in the Americas since 2021. She is a fierce and passionate advocate for gun violence prevention and really just engages with positive social change in her local community and across the country. Tonight, we'll also hear from Dr. Jennifer Kryszak, who is based in Chicagoland, and she serves as the Director of Strategic Planning for the Franciscan Peace Center. The Peace Center is a sponsored ministry of the Sisters of St. Francis of Clinton, Iowa. Jennifer brings a great depth of knowledge and training in theology, religion, and advocacy. So welcome both Angie and Jennifer. I'm really delighted to hear from you tonight.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you so much to all of you who have taken the time to join us tonight, as well as those of you who may be registered and will be watching this later. Sorry about that. But we're really just excited to be able to share a little bit about our coalition, our humble coalition and its beginnings, and then to try to delve into some of the Catholic social teaching principles that really guide and motivate us in this work. So let me just tell you the 2-minute version of how Nuns Against Gun Violence came to be. We were founded, like Lisa said, just over a year ago, around April of 2023. And really, it started with folks thinking about some of the work that we were doing, different congregations were doing on gun violence, and just being certain that we weren't doing it in a vacuum. You know, knowing that other congregations, other Catholic groups were doing this work, but not necessarily having that unified voice. Catholic sisters have unified voices on so many different issues. And we knew that there was a hunger for that unified voice on gun violence as well. So there were emails sent to our, some of you may be familiar with the Justice Conference of Women Religious email listserv, where many of us who are justice promoters share ideas, share resources. Emails sent through that got folks interested, and our timing, the Holy Spirit was involved in our timing, because shortly after, many of us gathered in person for the JCWR conference in St. Louis, and we were able to coalesce as a group across the states together and to begin to build this coalition. I'm not going to read the list of things that are written there, but just to give you a sense, Jennifer is going to talk more in depth about our mission statement. And so you'll hear a little bit more about why the things that are on this list are things that we've chosen to do as a coalition. Part of that has been figuring out, as Catholic sisters, associates, allies, what is ours to do in this work. But you can see there's prayer services and toolkits. This was our second Wear Orange that we've been able to commemorate together and to provide resources for folks to use. A lot of the business of building the coalition, right? So building that steering committee, recruiting folks, setting up those meetings, getting the spreadsheets, getting the membership, all of that information, getting that all together to build some infrastructure, if you will. Offering opportunities for letter writing for folks both at a state and a local level. Our webinar last year with Shane Claiborne, perhaps many of you were part of that. And then supporting local efforts of many of our members. There's been some really incredible initiatives and partnerships happening at state and congregational levels that we're really proud to support and to amplify.
As Angie noted, Nuns Against Gun Violence came together because we saw a need in society and felt called to respond to that need. As a steering committee considered how to articulate this need in a mission statement, we assessed our role as a Catholic coalition, our commitment to Catholic social teaching, and the concrete steps we could take to address gun violence. Our mission statement is here on the screen for you. So it's Nuns Against Gun Violence is a coalition of Catholic sisters and their allies that affirms the value of human life through prayer, education, and advocacy for common sense, evidence-based gun violence prevention. Central to this mission statement is the affirmation of the value of human life. This affirmation urges us to consider how gun violence affects all people. We also recognize that we have 3 specific ways in which we can work to protect life and prevent gun violence through prayer, education, and advocacy. Advocacy, of course, is essential for changing society. In order to pass legislation for gun violence prevention and transform our culture to one that values each and every human life, we need to be involved. We need to articulate a need for change and demand that changes be made at the local, statewide, and national levels. We know, however, that people will not take action for change without understanding the reality of specific situations. This is why education is necessary. As a coalition, we recognize that education about gun violence is not taking place within the institutional church. It is an issue directly related to the dignity of human life, but one that is rarely mentioned and normally only highlighted after the tragic loss of life in mass shootings. This needs to change. Because of this, Nuns Against Gun Violence is committed to educating people about the causes of gun violence, as well as common sense, evidence-based gun violence prevention. As people of prayer, we turn to God in as people of faith, we turn to God in prayer to grieve the loss of life in this country. Prayer can offer solace for those affected by gun violence and comfort communities as they struggle and grieve. As we seek to change our society, prayer does more than this. It also directs, inspires, and sustains our work for gun violence prevention. Prayer draws us closer to God and enables us to continue our work. Our mission statement emphasizes the value of human life. It reminds us how we, as a faith organization, can respond to violence within our nation and challenge our society to eliminate the epidemic of gun violence. Since the formation of Nuns Against Gun Violence, more than 60 congregations have joined our coalition. This is a map that gives us some sense, but it is kind of zoomed in, so you can't really see the full range of congregations in particular areas of the country. There are different reasons that sisters and those working for congregations cite for being part of Nuns Against Gun Violence. First, of course, the prevalence of gun violence within our society and the loss of life and trauma inflicted on communities urges many to work for systemic change to eliminate gun violence. For example, the Sisters of Mercy focus on 5 critical concerns. All of these are affected by gun violence: nonviolence, racism, women, earth, and immigration. I work for the Franciscan Peace Center, which is a ministry of the Sisters of St. Francis, Clinton, Iowa. The Sisters' mission is living and promoting active nonviolence and peacemaking, which clearly calls us to work to prevent gun violence. I know that members of many different congregations are with us today. In the chat, I invite you to share the reasons why your congregation is part of our coalition. We'd be excited to hear a little bit more from you about your reasons for being involved. Beyond being called by a charism or a mission statement, there are many personal reasons that sisters, their employees, and their allies are involved in this work. Many of us have been directly shaped by the trauma and loss of life associated with the epidemic of gun violence. Another reason why many congregations are involved in Nuns Against Gun Violence is a commitment to Catholic social teaching. Catholic social teaching calls us to develop relationships based on love and live lives of justice. It is rooted in scripture and developed in papal, conciliar, and episcopal documents. It contains 7 themes that challenge us to create a just society and includes a commitment to the poor and vulnerable. This commitment to the poor and vulnerable is often expressed in the ministries of congregations of women religious. Catholic sisters first worked in direct service, running schools, hospitals, orphanages, and a whole slew of other ministries. But they realized that systemic change was needed to address the poverty, racism, and violence that they saw in society and began to advocate to address the root causes of these issues. Presently, sisters recognize the need to also address the ways that we perceive one another and interact as a society, a need to transform consciousness. Nuns Against Gun Violence is part of this movement of advocating for systemic change and moving towards a transformation of consciousness, our way of being. It is because of this that we are aware of our culture and seek to respond in light of Catholic social teaching.
Thank you, Jennifer. So what we want to do first is lay out some of this cultural context. And many of the things that we're going to say tonight, many of those connections of Catholic social teaching, we know that many of you are experts in. And so we're not reinventing the wheel. We're just trying to make those connections between gun violence prevention as a Catholic issue on the value of human life and Catholic social teaching, and to try to encourage more folks to join this movement, more sisters, more congregations, more allies, and more Catholics in general. We want to hear it in homilies, right? We want to see Catholics advocating doing this work. And we're so grateful for all of the work that so many of you do, particularly on this issue. So let's set the stage a little bit then culturally, right? Gun violence is in and of itself a public health crisis, right? This is not something that is a one-off incident every now and then. This is something that is deeply embedded in our culture here in the United States of America. And so the quote I have there is from the U.S. bishops. It was the chair of several of the committees of the U.S. bishops who wrote a letter to Congress in 2022 after the Uvalde shooting. And they said this: "There is something deeply wrong with a culture where these acts of violence are increasingly common. There must be dialogue followed by concrete action to bring about a broader social renewal that addresses all aspects of this crisis, including mental health, the state of families, the valuation of life, the influence of the entertainment and gaming industries, bullying, and the availability of firearms." And what's so important from this letter, and this quote in particular, is that Catholic teaching is not a binary. It's not either or. We can't get into the polarization that we see in politics and in the media about it's either legislation for gun safety regulations or it's individual responsibility and mental health. Catholic teaching has that dialectical approach. It's both and. We have to address all aspects of this crisis, right? We really have to take it from all angles. And we have to address it as a cultural problem. This is important too. Pope Francis has talked about the throwaway culture that we really have embraced. That means even people are disposable, as well as things that he writes about so much in Laudato Si and elsewhere. We see that in our culture too, here in the US in particular, patriarchal norms have contributed to violence being glorified. We're numb to it. It's in our movies, it's in our TV, it's in our kids' video games. It's even, you see the photo there of the Barbie gun that was released that I think has been taken off the shelves since they did not have permission for the trademark. But you see how even in the culture, we're numb to the violence, and anything can be branded for marketing, right? So we've become it's become so ingrained in our culture that we don't even notice it anymore, and we're not as affected by it. And so we have to reject participating in that kind of throwaway culture. We know too that Catholic social teaching and Catholic doctrine has a seamless garment approach to life. And so again, this is a crisis on the dignity of human life. It is a crisis of people dying. And so we have to use that seamless garment approach. We should be hearing about it in churches, and we should be moved as Catholics to do something. And then lastly, again, as a sense of rejecting the polarization that we see in the country on this issue, is there's a real disconnect, right? We know that 6 out of 10 US adults favor stricter gun laws, favor what we would call common sense, evidence-based gun legislation. And yet we can't get laws passed in Congress. So there's a polarization there. There's a disconnect, both at the state level and the federal level between what's happening. And again, as Catholics and with Catholic social teaching us how to be involved in the culture, we have to take action on that. Next slide. And yes, the Barbie gun was a real gun. By the way. The other piece I want to say about setting this cultural context before we dive into some of the issues and the principles of Catholic social teaching is addressing this slogan that so often we hear, right? Guns don't kill people, people kill people. This is an anti-Catholic slogan, and we should call it out as such when it comes up as defining our culture and defining the way that guns function in our culture. So theologian William George writes about this slogan, and it was several years ago that he wrote about this, but it's so relevant and so true and so helpful for us framing this in a Catholic context. He says that this slogan severs the moral agency and the intentionality from our environment. And what he means is that if we are creating an environment where we allow for the complete proliferation of firearms, more guns than people in this country, 120.5 per 100 residents, and the fact that Christians own firearms at higher rates than the general US population, that is a social environment that is sinful. Not only is it a social environment that is full of structural sin, but it creates that occasion of sin because guns do what they are designed to do, right? So the idea that guns don't kill people, people do it, he says, treats guns more like bread knives than weapons. And again, as Catholics, we have to reject this idea that there is nothing we can do culturally or socially or systemically in order to change that.
Thank you for setting up that discussion, Angie. We're moving into a first section here on a gun violence prevention issue. And I want to acknowledge again what Lisa said at the beginning of the webinar, that a lot of the information that we're talking about is incredibly heavy and intense. So give yourself some space if you need it as we're going through here. So as we consider gun violence in the United States, our minds probably go to examples of mass shootings that continue to plague our society. Parkland, Uvalde, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, Orlando. I mean, the names of the cities keep multiplying. Here on the screen for you is a map of mass shootings that have taken place so far this year. We probably haven't heard about all of these mass shootings, but they have taken place and they're there. These are the realities that victims and families and communities are dealing with and trying to heal from. Repeated in these situations is the trauma of communities and the loss of life and the loss of a shared future. Common also to many of these mass shootings is the type of weapon used, an assault weapon. Every Town for Gun Safety provides some great statistics on the use of assault weapons. They note from 2015 to 2022, mass shootings with 4 or more people killed, where an assault weapon was used, resulted in nearly 6 times as many people shot, more than twice as many people killed, and 23 as many people wounded on average compared to times when assault weapon was not used. These statistics reveal the deadliness of these weapons. When we discuss assault weapons, we are focusing on military-style firearms. This includes not only the AR-15, but the whole AR-15 platform and other weapons that are created like the AR-15. An assault weapon, by definition, is a semi-automatic firearm that is capable of high-volume, rapid fire. One of the reasons that more people are killed or wounded when an assault weapon is used is because an assault weapon fires a round at a higher velocity than a handgun. That velocity can be up to 4 times faster than a bullet fired by a handgun. Another reason why assault weapons are so deadly is because of their ability to accept a detachable ammunition magazine or other feeding device. So large capacity magazines, or LCMs as they're sometimes called, can hold 10, 15 rounds of ammunition at once, and the shooter can shoot all of those without needing to reload the weapon. Therefore, they can shoot more. They can shoot faster without needing to hesitate. As Gifford's Law Center asserts, an assailant with an assault rifle is able to hurt and kill twice the number of people compared to an assailant with a non-assault rifle or handgun. What we cannot deny about these weapons is that their purpose is to wound and to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. Their purpose is to maim, incapacitate, and to end life. In relationship to Catholic social teaching, this really calls out that foundational theme of Catholic social teaching, which is the dignity of human life. So the dignity of human life is grounded within Scripture. Much of Scripture talks about the human being and how we are created. So in the book of Genesis, we have human beings created in the image and likeness of God. We get our dignity from that. We are like God. We are living lives that are supposed to be in relationship to God and in relationship to others as God is in relationship with us. Because of this, we can focus on that dignity of the human person and use it as a way to assess our society or judge our society. It provides us with a litmus test for the moral vision of our society. Do our communities value life? Are particular groups of people more valuable than other people? Are material objects more important than human beings? Are laws enacted to protect life and ensure the flourishing of all people? Centering the value of human life enables us to work for systemic change so that all people, all communities can flourish. The presence of assault weapons in our communities clearly fails this test. They are intended to end life and not to maintain the dignity of human life, which is the foundation of our Catholic social teaching. Our communities are not safer with assault weapons present, and people live in fear that a mass shooting could happen by them, that it could happen in the school where their children are, happen when they go shopping or go to a community celebration. One of the solutions to the presence of assault weapons within our society and the trauma that they inflict on our society, of course, would be an assault weapons ban. We know that these bans work. The statistics I have included here really lay that out for us, but there's a whole lot more I wasn't able to share also. So from 1994 to 2004, the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act included a federal assault weapons ban. So that expired in 2004. But during that 10-year period, gun massacres, so a gun massacre is when 6 people or more are killed during a shooting incident. those dropped by 37% during that 10-year period. Mass shooting fatalities were 70% less likely to occur. And that's in comparison to the shootings before that 10-year period and after that 10-year period. Since 2004, there has been a 183% increase in gun massacres and a 239% increase in fatalities. Those numbers are outrageous and really should call us themselves to respond, right? And to challenge our society to take action to ban assault weapons. But as I said, there is no federal law in place at this point that bans assault weapons. Some states have state laws that restrict access to, assault weapons. Here's a map for you. So these 10 states, you can see whether or not you're living in one of those states, have laws within the state themselves that would prevent access to assault weapons or the purchasing of it. It depends on how the individual law is written in those particular states. Minnesota and Virginia also have laws that include additional safety requirements and regulations on assault weapons, but they're not an assault weapon ban. So there currently is no federal law that would prohibit these weapons, but there's a lot of advocacy being done. For example, advocacy around the assault weapons ban of 2023. Now, Newton Action Alliance, which is noted at the bottom of this screen, is very active in promoting this coalition, this campaign against assault weapons. And they have some very public information where they list who it is in the House of Representatives and who in the Senate who has not signed on as a co-sponsor of the bill. So you can see here that there are some Democrats and independents who are not co-sponsors yet of the bill in the Senate, as well as some Democratic holdouts from the assault weapon ban in the House. We should note that Republicans are not signing on. So if you're in a place where you have Republicans in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, obviously we need to communicate with them that this is something that needs to be attended to, that this is part of a response to Catholic social teaching. So the U.S. House of Representatives actually did pass legislation in 2022 for an assault weapons ban, but it did not pass the Senate. There's a lot of talk that the votes are there, but it's not being pushed out whatsoever. So we need some work still. We need some advocacy around these issues so that we can actually bring about legislation that the country really wants. 67% of Americans support the assault weapons ban. That data comes out of the Giffords Law Center. So as we're reflecting on assault weapons and our call to advocate for an assault weapons ban, we really need to ask ourselves and our elected officials if they agree with the fundamental value of human life. Are they going to value the life that is so central to Catholic social teaching?
Second issue we picked, I should say that we could have picked any number of issues in the world of gun violence prevention, but we have a limited time, so we chose 4, and we thought they were 4 that were some of the most crucial, could make the biggest change, and had a lot of impetus behind them, a lot of energy behind them at the moment. So just a note about that. So in addition to the assault weapons ban, another piece of federal legislation that can't get passed in Congress, but is moving sometimes in states, is about safe and secure storage. So you see there, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Boston have their banner outside of the Mother House there in Boston that calls it like it is. Gun violence is the #1 killer of children and teens in America. #1. Right? It's the leading cause of death. It surpassed car accidents in 2020 for all children, but it's important to note that this was true for children of color for much longer than that. And we'll talk more about that on the next slide. But let me give a few more statistics about why it matters so much how guns are stored in the home, right? So you can see there, and these statistics come from a combination of Newtown Action Alliance and Everytown, that over 4.6 million children in this country live in a home with an unlocked and loaded gun. More children than that live in homes with locked guns, but unlocked and loaded 4.6 million children. And as a mother of three, this is one that really struck me and caused me to pause. That 1 in 5 kids, 20%, have handled a gun when an adult was not present. You can see that children who live in a home with an unsecured gun are more at risk for accidents, obviously, that we'll talk about, but they're also at double the risk for homicide, and they're 3 times the risk of suicide simply by living in the same space as that unlocked, unsecured, and loaded weapon. Everytown in particular has been tracking statistics about unintentional shootings by children. And that could mean a child that injured themselves with a firearm, killed themselves with a firearm, or injured someone else. And they've been tracking this since 2015. And last year was the highest number that they have seen so far of unintentional shootings by children under 18. Now, in those numbers, it was typically teens from 14 to 17, or heartbreakingly, children under 5. That tends to be where those numbers are at. Other important pieces, in addition, we hear about the deaths, the unintentional shootings, but there's also non-fatal injuries that happen around unlocked and loaded guns. And those injuries also occur either 2 to 4 times, somewhere in that range, more than the deaths that make the headlines. In addition to the deaths and the injuries, there's also the trauma for children that comes from witnessing gun violence, that comes from witnessing accidental shootings, any of those things. And none of that makes the headlines. So even as the statistics that we're sharing are often about the deaths, and again, the mass shootings, there is so much more that is kept out of the media that is so crucial and so death dealing on some of these issues. And then the last piece here is not only are we talking about children hurting themselves and others in the home with these weapons, but the numbers I saw were anywhere from the 76% to over 80% of school shooters obtain their weapons from their own home or that of a relative. Often they are not going out and securing them alone. They are simply taking them from their house or from the house of their family to use in these mass shootings. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the total death rate for children, again, starting in 2020, it became the #1 killer of all children. But you can, and I know this is hard to read, we will send out these slides when we send out the recording, so you can look at them closer. It's a lot of information, a lot to take in, so you can examine this a little bit closer. But this is all data from the CDC. And you can see here that if you look in particular at the rate of death for Black youth, it is 6 times higher in 2022 than for that of white youth. This is crucial because, again, and more about this soon, but as Catholics, we talk about this option for the poor, the option for those who are marginalized. And yet, here it is, death dealing for those already marginalized by society. You can see that firearm deaths doubled among Black youth from 2018 to 2022 and increased by 73% for Hispanic youth. So again, looking at this, oh, sorry, go back one more second, my bad. You can see again, the overall firearm death rate increasing by 46% doesn't even tell the full story really of where we are with the way that gun violence and firearms are affecting our children. Okay, next, please. So with secure storage, just a little bit more to tell you about this, because it's such a multifaceted piece. It's one of those pieces of legislation. It's one of those advocacy efforts, one slice of the pie that can have such a huge impact across the board on saving lives that would be lost to firearms. And so I mentioned a little bit about some of the data from the CDC. There was a survey that just got, data that just got released from the CDC last week. And this is a risk survey that they send to all 50 states. It's mandatory. but there's an optional firearm safety module that states can complete. Now, for 2021 and 2022, they only had 8 states take the option to complete this, which is disappointing in and of itself. But the numbers from those 8 states are outrageous. So you see that anywhere from 20% in Minnesota to as many as 44% of respondents reported a loaded firearm in their home. And roughly half of those, in all those 8 states, the numbers were about half, reported that they stored them unlocked. It's only 8 states choosing to do that, but it's giving us a sense, a cross-section, right, of what is actually happening in American households. A lot of what I've talked about when it comes to storage so far has been about youth and children, but they're not the only people at risk when we're talking about unsecured firearms in the home. 6 out of every 10 gun deaths are suicides. And that's an average of 65 per day that's from Everytown. And that we've seen the gun suicide rate steadily increase ever since 2006, right? And we know, unfortunately, that gun suicides too are more effective, right? A gun is more likely to be successful in a suicide attempt than other options. And so when we talk about the suicide rate overall, and we talk about gun suicides in particular, is a massive impact that could be had if we can keep guns away from those who are at risk for suicide, and more on that in the next section. The other piece with secure storage, again, it's multifaceted, addresses multiple different aspects, is gun theft, right? So I won't go through every one of these details here, but you can see how many guns are actually stolen each year. Often stolen out of homes, out of cars, in any way that they are not, again, properly locked and secured. And the guns that get recovered by police officers, there were 23,000 they looked at, and they found the majority of these stolen weapons were, in fact, used in violent crimes, yet again, taking more lives from unsecured guns. Next slide. So Catholic social teaching says to us that we have rights and responsibilities, right? So based on that Imago Dei that Jennifer talked about, that dignity of all human life that is given straight from God, everyone deserves human rights, not just to survive, but to flourish, right? The flip side of that is that we also have responsibilities to the whole collective because everyone else is also made in that image of God. And so our responsibilities then from that right stem out to all of society to uphold the common good and to keep building that beloved community. We're called to change the culture in that way. Catholic social teaching also talks about absolute rights and relative rights, right? So Cardinal Cupid tells us that the right to bear arms does not eclipse the right to life or the right of all Americans to go about their lives free of the fear they might be shredded by bullets from weapons of war at any moment. Just like Jennifer mentioned about shopping malls, parades, all kinds of places that we have to live in fear because of a relative right to own a firearm that is not an absolute right. And so more when we talk about the common good here in a moment, but it demands that we take care of those most vulnerable, the children, those at suicide risk, those who would be victims of violent crimes from stolen guns. And so on the next slide, we have the solutions to this, right? Again, what is the advocacy piece to this for safe storage? And so you can see there's 26 states that have adopted this policy. I'm so happy to say Rhode Island just adopted the most comprehensive safe storage law in the country last week, finally, after years and years. But again, studies show us that these laws work. Not only did they show an 11% decrease in firearm suicide rates, they showed a decrease in the overall suicide rate as well when the laws hold gun owners accountable when children access those weapons. You can see there from the Journal of American Medical Association, this one is incredible, that 78% lower risk found when there were locked firearms and locked ammo. So it makes a major impact to simply, you're going to have the right to own your gun, to adhere to the responsibility to lock it away. Slide. Yes. And then similar to what Jennifer showed you with the assault weapons ban from our friends at Newtown Action Alliance, here are the holdouts. If you live in one of these states, Ethan's Law is the federal law attempting to be passed for safe storage named after Ethan Song, a teenager who was killed with an unsecured gun in Connecticut. You can see on the left, the senators. Again, these are just the Democrats. There are no current Republican co-sponsors in either chamber. So again, if you live in one of these states, we'll get this information to you on the slides. Time to take some action and bug them to co-sponsor. The last piece on the safe storage that I'll just say very quickly is that so often what we hear polarizing is about arming more in schools, right? School hardening measures is what we hear. And one, again, the studies show that safe storage actually is what prevents the shootings, what keeps students safe, as well as holistic education. And that was provided lots of funding in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. But we still see states passing things to arm teachers to increase school security, which actually continues to cause more harm, to do more harm to the dignity of human life, because in particular, Black and Brown students get disproportionately affected by that. So just to clarify the myth that this is what could actually reduce school shootings, when we know that that is not the case.
Thank you, Angie. So Angie mentioned a little bit already about gun suicide deaths. And this is the next area of gun violence prevention that we're focusing on with our time together here. And these numbers for me from Everytown for Gun Safety are really pretty shocking, because I think when we think about gun violence and deaths from gun violence, we don't often think about suicide. But as Angie noted earlier, 6 out of 10 gun deaths in the US are suicides. People are having access to a firearm triples one's death by suicide. And these statistics here challenge some of our assumptions about who actually is affected by gun violence more than others. So this other one, the rate of firearm suicide in rural areas is nearly triple the rate in urban areas. I mean, the more that we think about what is actually happening in the country, the more our assumptions about gun violence need to be challenged, so that we understand the situations that are going on, that we can be educated here about the situations. So I think Angie already noted too that more than 25,000 people that we are killed by, sorry, let me say that again. More than 25,000 people. There are more than 25,000 gun suicide deaths each year. That's an outrageous number. Here with the slide from Giffords, you can see that number, the first column here is guns. All the other columns are other forms of suicide deaths and the ways that somebody might have died by suicide. But the fact that guns is the most lethal form of suicide in the country should call us to respond, right? That should be telling us that there's things that we need to be doing to attend to this situation. So one of the other things that I was thinking about with this is like, why is that so high, right? So if we think about guns, they often don't give you a second chance. Something doesn't happen. There's a lot of research also out there that says that often suicide with a gun is a very impulsive thing, and you don't get a second chance. It is the thing that will end a life. So also out of Everytown here, it says that 4% of suicide attempts without a gun result in death. Only 4%. But if a gun is involved, that percentage goes up to 90%. So it really is something that should be challenging us to think about how we can respond. Clearly, the lives that are affected by gun suicide deaths are ones that we are called to value. According to Catholic social teaching, we're called to protect all lives, right? And Catholic social teaching goes further in terms of going beyond that fundamental human dignity. It calls out this preferential option for the vulnerable, or preferential option for the poor. And Angie mentioned this a little bit earlier. But when we think about what the preferential option for the vulnerable is, it's thinking about how our society is tending to those most in need. Are we ensuring that everyone is taken care of? Everyone has what it is that they need to flourish across our society. So are our laws and our social services designed to protect the poor and the vulnerable? Do we have laws and systems in place to ensure that those who are a danger to themselves or a danger to others do not have access to firearms? This, of course, connects strongly to Angie's earlier discussion about us having rights and responsibilities. Our responsibility is to those who are vulnerable around us. It also is related to another theme of Catholic social teaching, which is the cult of family, community, and participation. So as we know, human people are social beings. We interact with one another. We live together. That is one of our rights as a human person, is to live within community. We can go further and say it's our right to live within a just community, right? That we should be able to live within a community that values all life and attends to the needs of all of those lives. So we've already mentioned that this is a public health issue. Gun violence within the country is a public health issue, and that's part of thinking about the common good. So thinking about gun suicide deaths is related to the common good. Are we attending to everything that it is that people need as they are struggling in different ways? So there's a lot of different ways that we can respond to gun death suicides and the ways that we can prevent them as a society. Gifford's Law Center lays out 6 different ways that we could move forward in finding solutions to ways to prevent suicide deaths. They urge universal background checks and licensing, waiting periods when buying weapons, healthcare-based suicide prevention programs. So keep in mind where this goes in relationship with Catholic social teaching, right? It's the dialectical approach. It's not only the laws that are preventing access, but it's also the laws that would enable people to get the care that they need. We need all of this. We also could attend to extreme risk protection order laws. And I'll say a little bit more about those in a minute. Voluntary gun relinquishment laws that allow somebody to give up a weapon if they feel they really would be better off without it being present with them. And smart gun safety training and safe storage laws. So all of the things that we've already been talking about are ways of protecting people who would be at risk of harming themselves. As we move forward, I'm going to talk a little bit here about emergency risk protection orders. The purpose of these orders is that a person that we're attending to someone who is at risk of harming themselves or someone else. So even though I've been talking about gun suicide deaths, we could also be talking about mass shooters and the ways that people could be displaying signs beforehand that that they would be a harm to other people. So these emergency risk protection orders could also apply in those cases. So again, both and. So for ERPOs, or these are also sometimes called red flag laws, it's only the court that can grant an order to prevent a person from accessing guns. Okay, so it's only the court. You can't just randomly take someone's guns away here. We're following the law. But depending on the law, in a particular jurisdiction, different people can petition the court. So family members are often people who can petition the court to say that, this person should not have access to a weapon. Members of a household in other states could be those people. Key community members are also possibilities, or law enforcement officers. one important thing to note here is that federal law does not necessarily prevent a person from purchasing a weapon. And this is because of the complexities of whether or not a person has been institutionalized for mental health and deemed unable to make decisions for themselves. It's very complicated, both in this area as well as whether or not somebody who has committed a violent crime can actually go out and purchase a weapon. So the laws there are very, very complicated, and really push us towards thinking and knowing that having state laws at this point that set up the ability for people to petition the court and ask for guns to be removed will actually save more lives. So there, at the federal level, there is no particular red flag law. There is funding within the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that allows for states to use that funding to actually support extreme risk laws in particular states. So 21 states presently have these laws, and those are listed up there on the slide for you. And they have been proven to work. So in the case of Connecticut, when they instituted their law and really started educating people about it, there was a 14% decrease in firearm suicide rates. When this took place in Indiana, there was a 7.5% decrease in firearm suicide rates. So these are laws that we know can actually assist in protecting life and protecting the vulnerable among us. These are also laws that 85% of likely voters support. So as we're thinking about ways of moving forward within our society and moving past that polarization, talking about the ways that we can support people in need within our community seems to be one of those talking points where we can make the connections and encourage people to advocate more for laws and legislation for social services that are going to attend to the needs of everyone within our society. So really the advocacy here that can take place really is around the expansion of these laws in other states. So if your state's not up there, this is something that you could be working on, but also education about the existence of the law needs to take place. If it doesn't, it's not going to be used and it's not going to make a difference. So really, researchers who focus on extreme risk laws really are saying that we need to talk about them more. We need to educate the public. Otherwise, they're not going to assist us in helping the people who need help. And within Catholic social teaching, we know that like educating people and thinking about the ways that we can reach out to the vulnerable, work for the common good, are things that we are called to do.
And last section here, weapons trafficking is the last piece that we decided to focus on to connect back to Catholic social teaching, which you will hear connects to all of the principles of Catholic social teaching we've referenced so far. And we'll add in solidarity as an umbrella that really is relevant here. I'm actually going to skip most of this slide for time's sake, but only to say that when we talk about weapons trafficking, we're talking about smuggling guns, we're talking about gun thefts, we're talking about guns that could have been purchased once upon a time legally, but then somehow or another, whether they're stolen or smuggled or trafficked, they fall into hands that could not purchase them or should not have been able to purchase them in the first place. So this slide is just telling you that there is plenty of domestic weapons trafficking that happens in the U.S. And importantly, the one thing I do want to highlight here is that the public is actually shielded from getting information on guns that are found at crime scenes and traced back by something called the Tierhart Amendment. And that's a law that actually prevents the Bureau for Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms from releasing the information about what they find out about crime guns to anyone not directly involved. That includes law enforcement officers that are not directly involved in it. So it's really important to understand some of the shielding of the gun industry that takes place in this and that is relevant. The information that you are going to see on the next slide, which you can go ahead and go to, was actually obtained through the Freedom of Information Act and lawsuits. Otherwise, we wouldn't even have some of this information. So what's important about weapons trafficking, in addition to the domestic piece, is that the gun violence crisis in the US is being exported to other countries. We're actually sending our death dealing elsewhere, over the border, right, into Latin America, into the Caribbean. And so there was an intelligence report that was leaked from the Mexican military earlier this year. And again, in addition to what's obtained in a report from Freedom of Information, that gave us a whole lot more information about guns that have been recovered in Mexico than we had to date. And so what we found is that there were 78,000 firearms that had been recovered in Mexico that could be traced to U.S. gun shops and smugglers. Tracing back to individual straw buyers, I give you the example there of Craig Adlong, who is a man in Texas. He was able to purchase 95 semi-automatic rifles at one shop in Texas over a 2-month period. 66 of those 95 were later recovered in Mexico. And that is one straw purchaser. That does not include the systems of purchasing and smuggling that are also included. That's some of the information that came out of this leak to give us some insight into really just how deep this problem of trafficking goes. The piece that was obtained through the Freedom of Information Act is a report by an organization called Stop U.S. Arms to Mexico, part of Global Exchange, called the Iron River of Weapons to Mexico. And a lot of this is focused on Mexico, but there are other countries. I'll reference some of them, but certainly Mexico is not the only one. You've seen Haiti in the headlines, more on that in a moment. We just happen to have more information at the moment about the guns that have been recovered in Mexico. So you can see, again, the number of guns that were recovered by the Mexican government, the ones they found and submitted to our government for tracing was up by 45% from 2015 to 22. And they were able to trace more than 2/3 of those back to the US. But half of the remaining ones have unknown origins, meaning that the numbers of guns that actually originated in the US is likely much higher than the 2/3, excuse me. Importantly, in addition to assault weapons, 50 caliber rifles are some of the most popular. These are weapons that have an even higher efficiency rate than assault style rifles like the AR-15. They're not legal for purchase anywhere in Mexico or Central America. And so again, we are exporting our refusal to honor the dignity of life, our refusal to honor our responsibility to the common good to other countries. And it's not just illegal smuggling. This is an important piece too, is plenty of guns also enter the markets in these countries through legal exports, right? But we're not addressing who is on the other end of these legal exports and what kind of human rights abuses are happening as a result of these firearms. Next. This is a graph. Again, you'll be able to interact with it. You can also check out the Stop U.S. Arms to Mexico website. It shows you by zip code where guns were traced that were recovered in Mexico. And so you can see all along border states, and I encourage you to take a peek at some of the state laws in these states, where guns were purchased, where they were purchased in mass numbers and then exported. So you can see just the depth of how far it goes. It's not all in one place. Obviously, the bigger circles are more, but it is widespread, not just at the border, but beyond. Next, please. So you probably heard about the lawsuit that was brought by the Mexican government against some of these gun manufacturers and one distributor. And so this is the same kind of public health lawsuit. This is a lawsuit about the common good that is about taking public health and knowingly creating harm, right? That's what the lawsuit is alleging. And then you also saw probably the four congregations of U.S. sisters who sued Smith & Wesson last year. They are shareholders in the company suing as shareholders for the same thing, for ignoring the legal risk, ignoring the death dealing, ignoring the way, again, that these companies, these manufacturers are really harming the poor and the vulnerable, those already marginalized in our society. One thing that's important is that the guns are durable goods. They're not consumables. It takes an average of 7 years between the time they're purchased and the time recovered. So it's so important that we go upstream and stop this particular crisis of trafficking, because they don't go away. It's going to keep increasing. The violent crime is going to keep increasing the more that we let it go on. And again, in the spirit of that both and with Catholic social teaching, the guns are fueling the fentanyl crisis. They're fueling what we hear is the immigration crisis at the border, right? People are forced into migration by violence. People are forced into migration by the uptick in disappearances. And so it is all connected. That common good is all connected to some of this gun violence crisis that we're exporting. Next. So we talk about solidarity, right, with Catholic social teaching. And you know this, that it means that we do belong to one another. We are, in fact, called to love our neighbor in really concrete ways, and that justice can only come from peace. We cannot continue to send assault rifles and 50 caliber rifles to Latin America and then call for peace, right? As a country, we can't do that. As a society, and as Catholics in particular, we cannot do this. Pope Francis, when he talked to Congress in 2015, named this crisis about deadly weapons, about money that is drenched in innocent blood. And here we are 10 years later, and the particular crisis of weapons trafficking has only gotten worse. Next. So advocacy around weapons trafficking, and that was, a crash course. All of this was a real crash course here, just to give you some sense. But there are ways that we can stand in solidarity. There are ways that we can advocate for this. I named there two particular pieces of legislation. One is still in the House only. The Stop Arming Cartels Act is in both chambers now. And both of these are in particular trying to address the way that weapons are exported to Latin America and the Caribbean. There's been some action alerts from Mercy and other congregations on these. But those are one step towards doing this, as well as where we started with the assault weapons ban that bans those weapons that we know are preferred by particularly the violent groups. We can stop them here, and we can stop sending them elsewhere.
Thank you for that, Angie. So we have covered a lot of information about gun violence prevention this evening, and Catholic social teaching and the connections between both. And I just wanted to invite everyone who has joined us this evening, as well as those who might listen in the future, to continue to join us in this journey in our dedication to gun violence prevention. Join us as we pray. At our first meeting of every month of our coalition, we have a virtual prayer service for victims of gun violence. So we'd like to invite you to that. We'd like to invite you to continue to be educated about gun violence prevention and the ways that we can be involved within finding solutions for these diverse issues. So we will be sharing more information about future webinars, as well as other ways that we can continue to educate one another. And then finally, to encourage everybody who has listened and thought about these issues to take action. Advocacy is essential for changing our society. If we do not do it, it will not change. Gun violence will not magically go away. We need to have a voice and assert ourselves and say that society needs to actually attend to the ways that we think we should live, that we should care for the vulnerable. We should honor the dignity of each and every single human person. We should be in solidarity with those who are both within the United States and across the globe. So in the coming week, we will be sending out a follow-up email to this webinar, including a recording to this presentation, and inviting you to some advocacy opportunities. So there'll be a resource sheet that will provide some more education for you, as well as prayer opportunities and advocacy. But thank you all for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Jennifer and Angie. I just invite us to take a moment to pause. We learned and remembered that gun violence is a public health crisis here in the United States of America, and that gun violence prevention is a life issue, and our Catholic faith compels us to respond. So I just invite you to take a moment to pause as we learned about weapons trafficking, assault weapons ban, principles of Catholic social teaching. I invite you to situate yourself. How did this impact you? How does this compel you to act? We've each been impacted by gun violence in different ways. And so we honor that. At this time, we also offer some space for questions, for responses. We have about 5 to 10 minutes or so for that before we wrap up. But just a deep gratitude first to Angie and Jennifer for offering what I felt was a very accessible demystification of a lot of jargon around gun violence prevention that can be a little overwhelming as someone who's not an expert in that. And so just a deep gratitude to this information and to really center the dignity of all people in your presentation. So open up for questions if you wish to write any in the chat. There was a specific question about weapons trafficking we can get to in a moment. But feel free to write in the chat or use the raise hand feature or try to wave down if you can. Angie, I know this is a question maybe specifically for you around weapons trafficking. If we know of if there's any, you mentioned a little bit about there's the No Arms to Mexico coalition work happening. Do you know of any other groups that are working specifically in the Caribbean? Someone had mentioned connections to sisters that they have in Haiti and other Caribbean countries. So if you know any of that, feel free to.
Yeah, and actually, Jennifer, since I'll answer the question, but if you want to just go ahead and show our last closing slide, because I do reference it there. The Stop U.S. Arms to Mexico that will be on the reference sheet does talk a little bit about other Latin American countries. But a lot of congregations of women religious do have sisters in Haiti or have legacies and history with Haiti. And so again, on this slide that we'll send out to you, there is a Stop Illegal Gun Trafficking to Haiti coalition that has formed, largely with JCOR. Nuns Against Gun Violence is a part of it, a couple of congregations in on the ground, holding an organizing meeting next week. So that information will come out to you with this. And I'll go ahead and send it out to the Nuns Against Gun Violence listserv as well. The hope is for this is a limited life project that will host a webinar with some high-level ambassadors and other U.S. Haiti folks addressing and educating about the issue, specifically arms trafficking to Haiti there in July. And then hopefully an action, whether that's with Congress, Homeland Security, whatever will be the most effective in September. So we'll send that information out with everything else, but I'll also send it separately to the list.
Great, thank you. So again, I welcome any questions or responses. And if you are in the gallery, feel free to come off mute if you have a question or response. I did have a question for both of you, if you'd be willing to respond, about kind of what motivates you or what's your why for being engaged in this work. Of course, you're both really capable advocates for justice in your roles, but how do you engage in this work, or kind of what gives you hope? So maybe motivation or hope.
If you want to go.
And then I see that Deb has her hand up, so I'll get to you, Deb. Thanks.
In terms of motivations, for me, it's a lot of personal things, as I think it probably is for everybody. I wasn't able to follow the chat, but in terms of my own motivations, I lived about 45 minutes from Parkland when the shooting happened at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. And that experience, I was teaching college at the time, that experience of teaching young people who had just been in high school and potentially knew some of the students who were either at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas or lost their lives there, that really influenced me greatly. I've also lost several members of my family to gun violence by suicide. And that's a powerful impetus to keep committed, to remind yourself that there's ways to actually prevent that happening from somebody else, that other families don't need to feel what it is that my family has felt. And in terms of hope, I think this coalition gives me actually quite a bit of hope in this work. Sometimes it's a bit heavy, but meeting twice monthly with a group of people who will, give you a whole long example of the things that they're doing in their own localities and the difference that they're seeing and the community that they're making. That's very hopeful for me. I'm also involved in several of the meetings for national gun violence prevention organizations, and hearing their work and their commitment on a monthly basis. It's a reminder that things can change because people are deeply committed and want to make that change possible.
Thanks, Jennifer, for sharing both your personal why and your hope. I think many of us can relate to that. I'm going to get to Deb's question in a moment. Just to clarify that we will be sharing these slides soon. We know that there was a lot of material and resources shared, so do not worry about that. And Deb, go ahead.
So, number one, this was just excellent. I mean, it's outstanding. And I'm just thinking, so many Catholics, as you all have noted, never hear anything about this epidemic, this, assault against life. I just thought I have this weird picture, not weird. No, it's actually like you two doing a presentation for the bishops. And then like, how could we, in a sense, become advocates in our own communities, parishes, like doing a circuit with this kind of information? It's so clear about, we read all this stuff, but this really like clarifies things in such an important way that makes you feel like you can get your arms around it, which isn't often the case when you're just reading piecemeal stuff. So I just to make that comment, I'm throwing it out there as like, how do we, sort of proliferate this kind of presentation among Catholics so that they can really see this in a brand new way. Fabulous, absolutely fabulous. Thank you.
Thanks,
yeah,
Deb,
let
for
me
that.
say really quickly is that a lot of what we talked about was big picture federal legislation, like big things, right? Big packages, big bills, big actions. But we all know that change really starts at that hyper local level, right? So it could be something as simple as talking to a parish priest about including victims of gun violence in the petition every week, right? It could be, it could be small. Why don't I hear about this in a homily, right? Like putting someone on record. Why is this too political in some way? I think even those really small parish level ways of talking about it, write to your bishop. We actually just got a new bishop in Providence about 1.5 years ago. Our previous bishop had no comment or advocacy on this issue. And our new bishop was not outspoken on this issue previously, but we were able to get statements from our diocese to our General Assembly supporting safe storage and an assault weapons ban. That has not happened in this diocese. So you just never know. It might just not be on the radar. So small things can add up, I think.
And to even just quickly add, if you can think of 5 people to send the resource list to, or to have a conversation with, say, hey, I attended this, or this really struck me. I think that's a huge piece of the personal, because the reality is we're all impacted by gun violence in this country by virtue of the structural and social sins in which we live, right? So I just encourage folks to share that out. Michael, go ahead and unmute. Thanks for offering a question or comment.
And just to piggyback on what Deb said, back in the 80s, if you remember, the bishops had a pastoral letter or whatever, and in all the parishes, for a period of time, all the priests in the parish, at least in my diocese, gave talks on nuclear armament and talking about how we had to draw back as a country. So perhaps we can do something like this. This is such an important thing. So if we could, through this coalition, and join other coalitions and talk to priests and bishops who are favorable to this, and then have this move up the rank and have the, Conference of Bishops decide that as a goal for this country and have all the parishes do that, then that would be another way to get this out.
Thanks, Michael, for that. And just to note that Angie shared in the chat a bishop's letter from 2020. So there's record of noting that this is a life issue. This is not a niche thing. This is really rooted in our Catholic faith. And by virtue of our baptism, we're compelled to act, right? So thank you for that. Any other final questions or comments or reactions? I think there was just a really beautiful, just gratitude that's coming in the chat. And also to note too that, yes, we've heard statistics, but those are families and those are our communities. I appreciated this really key question that Jennifer posed to us, which was, is everyone taken care of? And that's our call. Is everyone taken care of? And until that's the case, we're going to continue to work so that we ensure that all are taken care of, especially those who've been most marginalized. So just a deep gratitude to you, Angie and Jennifer. And I know you have a final kind of announcement about this coalition more broadly.
We just want to, it's hard to take all this in and not know what to do, right? It's a lot of information. It's an overwhelming problem. That's the nature of it. I guess that's what folks want us to think. Well, it's too big, so we won't tackle it. But we disagree. And we think there's plenty little things that we can do. And just a note, in that 2020 Bishop's letter, there's very specific recommendations for assault weapons bans, for safe storage. The concrete things are already out there. We just have to hold people accountable to them. So I'll say that. And then also I'll invite all of you. Many of you I already know and are part of our wonderful coalition. But in the email that you'll get, you can join our Nuns Against Gun Violence email list. We meet on the first and third Thursdays of the month at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And it's a chance for sharing resources, for hearing what other people are doing. Sometimes we have a lot of legislative nonsense to advocate on and to call people to action on. But a lot of times people are also sharing their incredible work that's happening. And that is always uplifting. We also, again, in the resources, we put in there the Mercy Action Alerts and the Franciscan Peace Center newsletter, just by virtue of those are our employers. But so many congregations have ways that you can call to action based on particular charisms. And again, on the listserv for Nuns Against Gun Violence, you can find out more about those. And then also inviting you to any one of secular gun violence partners that we have with the Gun Violence Roundtable that meets weekly. You can hear from a number of huge and tiny gun violence prevention organizations, a few faith-based, largely secular, that helps us know where the energy is and how we can then harness our voices and do what is ours to do as Catholic sisters, allies, and associates to know our role and to do our part in this. So hopefully that helps. And we look forward to seeing you on those calls as well.